And by awesome, I mean terrible in every possible way. A few months ago, I started talking to Freddie Hernandez and Tyler Hoover about putting together something that we've come to call Car Trek. And it was going to be a challenge to see who could buy the coolest exotic car for the price of the new C8 Corvette. We were all slated to judge a class at the Amelia Island Concours d'Elegance, and it just made sense for us to build kind of a crazy road trip filled with challenges on the way. And we had talked to Auto Tempest about this, and they had sponsored us to help us put together the production budget to get some better cameramen and equipment to do a really high class, at least for us YouTubers, video production that we could build into an episodic series. And so we set out to Auto Tempest to try to find the coolest cars that we could. And Auto Tempest is a way to search all the major national listing sites at the same time. So you one search and you find all the cars that you possibly can. And so it was a really powerful tool for trying to find obscure used cars that were going to be about $60,000. And I ended up really swinging for the fences, and I bought a manual transmission 2006 Lamborghini Gallardo Spyder, a car that you should never be able to buy for that amount of money. In fact, it was one of about 80 manual Gallardo Spyders from 04 to 2014 model year that ever came to the US, but I was able to find one that had been in a flood. And so I bought the car for $59,000. So it was the perfect scenario, perfect thing, but it needed a tremendous amount of work. And it was an ambitious thing to try to do because I learned through the process how many parts it needed, how long it was going to continue to take to get them from Italy, and the fact that once I got them, I still had to get the car rebuilt. So it was a salvage title rather than a rebuilt or salvaged with a D at the end title. And so it was for a flood. It could have been, for a lemon law or a theft recovery or any other reason, a crash, that a car would get a salvage title. But it was a California salvage certificate from a flood that happened in Santa Monica in April of 2019. And when I bought the car, I didn't know much about it other than it was a great deal and I had a lot of room and, to fix it, make it nicer, and then still theoretically sell it one day for a profit. But I started the process of getting it fixed and putting new tires on it, wrapping it a better color for this, and ordering all the parts that I knew it was going to need. And I was really excited about this car. And at the same time, Freddie and Tyler were out shopping for their entries into this thing, and Freddie had bought an Aston Martin V12 Vantage S after searching and making a lot of very insulting offers on some DBSs, most via yours truly. And Tyler had a Ferrari 360 Spyder. So yes, we knew what we were trying to buy, and it wasn't exactly a surprise to each other when we revealed them at the starting line. But, it was very Top Gear style of somewhat contrived, somewhat forced, and a whole lot of fun. So I knew they had their cars pretty well sorted because they had bought good cars. I had bought a terrible car that I knew very little about, but certainly knew that it needed some big things. And the problem with cars like that is that you usually don't know what else it needs until you fix the more obvious things. So I knew that it needed everything serviced, every fluid that we could replace as fast as possible replaced, and it needed a clutch and a throwout bearing, a rear main seal, and probably a pilot bearing. So I ordered all those things and I had them ready. But again, the car was barely making any power as I took it over there. I took it from the wrap shop about 50 miles to my guy's shop next to Road Atlanta, and it would barely go. I say it wouldn't go 50 miles an hour. We got up to like 60 to 70 miles an hour a couple of times. It's throwing off cat errors, flashing check engine lights. It is freaking out, and it certainly is making, maybe 150, 200 horsepower. So I get the car there and I leave it, and once all that's done, which takes, again, about a week, we then learn that it needs a fuel pump. And the fuel pumps were on such back order that I could not get one by the time that I had to leave. And so at that point, I'm scrambling around looking for alternatives, Audi parts that would cross over. But I ended up finding an OEM one, which I wanted so I could maintain the fuel gauge working, at least I thought. And I end up ordering it from the UK, getting it in 2 days, and we're off. We still have a couple days of work because it's a very intensive thing to get the rear panel on the other side of the motor from the clutch and throwout bearing that we'd already been into. So Charles, my Lamborghini mechanic, is awesome at Casey Card Motorsports, and he's working as hard as he can because he knows what I've got to get done, but he just isn't getting there. And so he keeps saying, I need another day, and we get literally to where, best case scenario, the car is ready less than a day before I've got to depart for Florida to meet the other guys. And so middle of that week, Wednesday, Thursday, I start to realize, look, if this car doesn't make it I can't not show up. Like, these guys have bought cars. Auto Tempest has set up our production. We've thought about all the challenges and the things. We've rented tracks. We've got film guys flying in with all their equipment. Like, I can't miss it. So if I don't make it in this car, I'm gonna have to, at the very last minute, pay super retail for whatever looks the part to just show up and pretend that it was the car that I always intended to bring. And I was like, man, that just stinks. Like, I don't wanna do that. If I'm gonna have to come with a backup car, I need to find the right backup car. So I get back on Auto Tempest and start searching for other options, and there's nothing immediately great, but I do stumble upon another Gallardo, thinking, you know, I'd like to stay in the Lamborghini something. It looks nice, Ferrari, Lamborghini, Aston against the Corvette, and I find one in Alabama. And the car is a 2010, so the newer LP generation, an LP560-4 Spyder, with 104,000 miles. Now, I've seen some early cars, the 04 to 08 Gallardos, with more than 100,000 miles. That's not wildly rare, but I'd never seen an LP generation car with that many miles. So it was a really exciting premise. It's a great clickbait idea. Like, I've got a 100,000 mile Lamborghini, but at the same time, it was really, really rough. And so I started talking to the dealer that has it. They'd bought it 2 to 3 weeks prior at an Odessa auction. And I'm like, man, I don't want to buy this car, but I probably need to. And they're like, you know, excited to hear. They watched the videos. They're like, hey, well, we'll just bring it to you. They lived in Birmingham. We'll trailer it over to you tonight. You take a look at it. If you want it, we'll just leave it there. And so on the way, they call me and they realize that they don't have the title. And they went looking, and apparently they'd been waiting on it to be sent from the auction, and it hadn't gotten there. So I'm like, all right, well, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I'm not paying you without a title, but you're welcome to bring this car. And so they bring it over there and get it unloaded. It's late at night. We pull it in the garage, and I look around, and the thing is awesome. And by awesome, I mean terrible in every possible way. And so for what we're trying to do to make kind of an event, a theatrical production around how bad our choices are, it was great. The interior is dirty and worn, but not like torn through. And it's a Rosso Vic car. Beautiful color combination, but it's wrapped in this absolutely atrocious matte white with black accents. Just terrible looking wrap that's peeling in parts, and is just absolutely terrible. I drive it around the block, and you know, it sounds good, it shifts well, and the car looks really, really cool. It's got an error light on for the TPMS sensor. The tires that are on it are wrong and bald and old. It's got the most warped brake rotors I've ever felt on a car that was still kind of drivable, but certainly not something I could go put 1,500 miles on. I was like, man, this thing is just rough in every possible way. And I've only got, at this point, about 48 hours to recondition the car in order to make it to the starting line. And so I kind of talked to Freddie and I talked to Tyler, and I'm like, hey, this is where I'm at. Like, I don't know if the stick car is going to make it. So I think I've got to buy this other car in order to have something. And it was a good price. It was $67,000. And, you know, the cheapest LP Gallardo that's probably ever sold. I'm like, man, I don't know what to do. I don't really want to have two of these things, but it's stupid not to. I'm betting too much money on this car working in a way that I can't know yet. So I end up agreeing to buy it. They're like, well, the auction now has the title. They're going to overnight it. So the next day they were supposed to have it. So we were going to meet and rendezvous and get the title. And so that was going to be Friday, but I told him, I was like, look, in order for me to be willing to buy this car, I have to be able to start working on it the next day. And so I needed to find tires and brakes urgently in order to be able to drive this car safely. And so they were fine with that. They were like, look, if we don't get the title, we'll pay the service bill. That Friday morning, the only shop that could possibly have the parts and do it was Lamborghini Atlanta. So I go there and pay kind of retail money for brake rotors and pads and new sets of tires, TPMS sensors, and a brake fluid change. Unfortunately, the top was not working on this car either, and that meant that we couldn't actually access the oil reservoir in order to check it or fill it, which was terrifying. But, you know, I figured at some point we'd be able to disassemble it and get it in there. That being said, normally there's an emergency release that like Freddie uses in order to make his top work now, but that was not working. For some reason, that was seized. And so further disassembly was going to be required in order to make any of that work. And presumably they'd have to top off the fluid reservoir for the top if it wasn't just the micro switches. And so whatever, you know, you got to do it. I spent about $7,500 on this car on a Friday, and then a few hours later, the flood car's ready. So I go and pick it up, go get the salvage inspection done, do all the things that I needed to do with it, and it all works. Like, the car is actually running quite well. In fact, I drive it out towards Birmingham to pick up the title and write them the check that I told them I would for this car. Even though I told them, like, hey guys, I really don't need the car. It's a whole lot nicer than you left it. You got a bill to pay at Lamborghini Atlanta, but if you want to keep it, you can have it. Turned out they didn't want to keep it. And so I figured, all right, well, I've got the backup car. And I mean, because I didn't even know if I was going to get halfway to Orlando and the flood car was going to blow up or we were going to have endless issues. And we did end up having a lot of issues, but they were all very entertaining and very interesting. And I ended up with this backup car. I will say I never thought that I would utter the sentence, I had to buy a backup Lamborghini, but it was honestly the only decision that made sense at the time. And fortunately, I'm in it well enough that I'll be able to sell it at some point to somebody who enjoys the superlative of having a 6-figure mileage on their Lamborghini. It's no million-mile Lexus, but it's pretty cool. I mean, it's quite the novelty to be able to park that car and say, hey, I just finished 105, 110, 125,000 miles on it, and I expect I'll find somebody who will run it all the way up to 200, because those motors are great. You see plenty of the V10s and the S6s and S8s that do run to 200, 250,000 miles, so I'm curious to see how far it'll go. Unfortunately, when you have as many interesting cars, it's hard to rack up a ton of miles on one, so it'll be the perfect only exotic for somebody who wanted to stretch into something that's really, really cool, and so I'll probably list it for sale fairly soon. And it's actually a really nicely equipped car. It's got a backup camera, it's got Carbon 1 and Carbon 2, it's the Bicolore Elegante interior with red stitching, and everything actually, it looks really nice once it's all cleaned up. And so I haven't touched it. It still looks awful and disgusting, but I have thought that, maybe, if I do keep it and just try to really sell it, then I'll peel the wrap off and make it nicer and stuff like that. But I don't know, we'll see. It's got the right Cordelia wheels, and it's a really nicely spec'd out car. And in doing the research, it just accumulated 30,000 miles a year for each of the last 3 years, and then this guy just decided to stop paying for it, and a bank that I know pretty well repossessed it. They ran it through an auction, these Birmingham guys bought it, and they brought it to me. So, as always, a strange series of events that leads to me owning another strange Lamborghini, but hey, whatever works.